Hi, this is Paul Humber. It's April 24, 2025, and this is a debate between two men, and I've entitled it, Did Man Come from God or Apes? The debate was held at Westminster Seminary in the Van Til Hall on April 20, 2001, but is being uploaded for the first time this year. Orthodontist Dr Jack Cuozzo, he is on the left side there, and he has since passed approximately 7 years ago. And Dr Alan Mann, he's on the right side there with some skulls, some of his skulls and model skulls in front of him. They were the two debaters, and I served. I was at the time Executive Director of Skilton House Ministries, and I served as moderator. And I'm holding in my hand right now, I'm going to put a light on here so that you can maybe see it better. This is the model that Dr. Mann gave to me before the debate. You can see there's still a crack. In the next slide you'll see that crack. But I want you to notice especially the 16 teeth here. Now just remember that as I continue on this. I have one more slide before I go into the actual video. As I say, this is April 24, 25. It's the very model of the Chapelle-aux-Saints Neanderthal skull given to me prior to the debate by Dr. Mann. Now let me get to the next slide here. Okay, here it is. Now notice I'm pointing. Maybe I should have a white pen, which I don't seem to have. I don't know if you can see my finger here. This is one of the early pictures of the Chapelle-aux-Saints, and notice there's just one tooth, and this is of course a much better picture of that original tooth. Notice the filings at the tip and so on and so forth, almost suggestive that he did some filing or whatever his teeth. But again, this is the model that I just showed you, and there are 16 teeth in that model as opposed to one in the original. But there is only one upper tooth in the original. Dr. Mann had told me over lunch that the model was of La Chapelle-aux-Saints. And so I ask here, is adding 15 upper teeth misleading, especially if none of the 16 look like the original? Is this true science? Did Chap, and that's my nickname for La Chapelle, did he live 5,000 years ago? Or not 50,000 years ago that some of the evolutionists want us to believe. The skull was with animals, were likely washed into a cave by huge amounts of water, and the original incrustation on the skull suggests it was submerged for a long time. It apparently was adhering to the cave walls with animal bones. Didn't God reveal there was a global flood involving much water 5,000 years ago? Do evolutionists shy away from anything that would suggest the Bible to be true? Should we trust God or evolutionary ape imaginings? I did not upload the entire debate because 1 hours plus seemed to be sufficient. But you can make a comment if you want to request more.
Good evening, and I'd like to give a warm welcome to everyone that has come out on this beautiful spring evening. When I came, it was not raining, and maybe it still is not raining, but it certainly is a delightful time to come with the flowering trees and so on. This is the first debate of this kind sponsored by Skilton House Ministries. We're very pleased with the interest that has been shown and all of you that have come, and we want you to all feel very welcome. We do have some refreshments following the event this evening. You also, in the program that you received, presumably have a 3x5 card. There are directions concerning that under G, for example, and also the second paragraph on page 2. The question that you may want to ask, and you may want to wait until you've heard the speakers initially, namely after sections A and B, before you write that one question. And it should be directed to one of the speakers, and their names are on the front of the program as well as on the brochures that many of you received. And one question directed to a specific individual. And both speakers will have opportunity to respond to that question. It is likely that we will not be able to cover all of the questions this evening. And if you would like to have your question answered anyway, put your name and address on the back side of that card, and we'll try to see that you get an answer, even if it is not considered this evening in a formal sort of way. There is also a change. The wording on page 4 of the program about videotapes has been revised. A brief clarification is available when you inquire about such at the table at entry. The debates this evening are being videotaped by the Westminster media, and we certainly would like to express our appreciation to Westminster Theological Seminary for allowing us to host these debates in these facilities. But that should be the only videotaping taking place this evening, the one that is being done officially. I hope that all of you have read the statement in paragraph 4 there about refraining from cheering or applauding or any outward form of communicating your approval or disagreement. We do encourage you to talk with the debaters following the event this evening. The first speaker will be Dr. Alan Mann, and he will be affirming the question on the front cover: did humans evolve from ape-like ancestors? He will have 30 minutes, and Dr. Cuozzo will have 30 minutes to respond. And then under part C and D, each will have 5-minute rebuttal opportunities. And there is a slight correction under E and F. That has changed from 2 minutes to 3 minutes for that second rebuttal segment. Yes? Oh, what did I say? Okay, sorry, Cuozzo. My fault. And so I'm going to assume that you have had opportunity to read information about both of these speakers. They're in this brochure that you have received. I'm not going to take up valuable time. And I'd like to give Dr. Mann a warm welcome to the Westminster Seminary, Van Til Hall. And Dr. Mann, you're on.
Oops. Good evening. I'm very happy to be here, and I thank everybody involved, Paul especially, for inviting me to participate with you this evening. I think I have some very interesting things to tell you. Some of them you might not have thought of. Some of them you might have thought of and thought little about, or thought that they were, in fact, not able to be demonstrated. And what I would like to do with you in the 30 minutes that I have available at the beginning is take you on a little journey with me because when I started my career looking at the fossil evidence for human evolution 35 years ago, I'm almost fossilized myself, so you can get an idea of how long I've been at this, I had doubts. I am a very reverent person. I have my own private views about how the world and the life forms on it got this way, and I had strong suspicions about what I would find when I began looking at these bits of bone, bits of teeth, sometimes found with odd-shaped pieces of chipped stone and so on. I really had a great deal of difficulty in looking at these things with a kind of straight eye. What were they? And how did they get there? And what did they tell us about ourselves and how we got here? Now, we all know that we are an extraordinary species and that we have unique gifts, amongst which is a brain that constantly asks questions about who we are, why we got here, and why we are so special. And I think that we have to look at the kinds of things I'm going to tell you about tonight in that way, because I have spent most of my life looking at fossil bones of our ancestors all over the world. Unfortunately, human evolution did not occur in the New World. By the time the ancestors of Native Americans reached here, they already looked like ourselves, that is, modern human beings. So in order to look at the fossil evidence, like my distinguished colleague, Dr. Cuozzo, also did, you have to travel to the Old World. You have to travel to Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. And I've done that, and I've spent an enormous amount of time looking at these materials. So if you'll come along with me, let's look at some of this stuff. Janet, can I have the first slide, please? And I'm starting off with a cartoon that I think many of you may have seen in the Inquirer. It's a Tony Off editorial cartoon. And I'm giving it to you because I want to face straight on the kinds of discussions that you might want to have with me in terms of just how it was that evolution operated and why it operated. I don't have any answers to why it operated. I have some answers about how it operated, but the idea of how it began and the kinds of principles that set it off, those are questions that remain open. And I think that we who have the gift of thinking about these things have to keep that in mind. Next one, please, Janet. Now, when I began to look at the fossil evidence, I began to travel. I started out in South Africa. I worked in East Africa. I worked in Asia. I worked in the Middle East. I worked in Europe. And what I began to find were fossil skulls that were placed in sediments that were as old as 3 and 4 million years old. You might say to me, okay, how do I know that they're 3 or 4 million years old? Well, it's not carbon dating, because radiocarbon dating, carbon-14 dating, has a time span of about 30,000 years, and maybe with new techniques, maybe back to 50 or 60,000. The kinds of techniques that are used here are based on the radioactive decay of other isotopes. These are based on very well-known physical principles, and we understand how unstable isotopes break down into stable elements over a given amount of time, their half-life. And so, when we find, especially a lot of the early fossils in sediments associated with the Great African Rift Valley, which was a time when there was an enormous amount of volcanism in the area, and volcanic rocks are very much able to be dated using a variety of isotopic techniques, we can place them back in time. And what I want to show you tonight, because my task is to take the affirmative, did we evolve from an ape-like form? I'm going to stay with these very early forms. And I want to talk about these very early forms because they have features which are not human, they're not ape, they're a combination of some ape-like features, some human features, and a lot of features that are very specially their own. They are unique animals whose kind is no longer on the planet. And I want to take you through and show you some of those features. I am not going to go into detailed scientific materials. I'm going to show you the fossils. You can decide for yourself. That's the way I started out, and you can do the same thing along with me. You might note that the fossil skulls go through a time-ordered sequence in which a certain set of changes can be seen to be occurring over time, from 3 to 4 million years ago, right up to this skull that was found in a little village in the southwest of France. This is the skull from Cro-Magnon. It was perhaps 18,000 years old. It is a skull that is typical of living Europeans, but the skulls before show differences, features that can be placed within a time-ordered sequence. For example, brain size increases. For example, face size decreases. For example, they have brow ridges. And though my honored debating colleague here will tell you that the brow ridges are there because these people were very, very ancient, and the brow ridges developed as the result of chewing stresses, I will show you that many of these fossils are juveniles, are young, whose skeletons and dentitions had not reached maturity, yet they had really nice and well-developed brow ridges. So there are features here which characterize these beings which are not us. Okay, what we want to talk about is the continent of Africa, and especially the Great African Rift Valley, because it's in the rift that we find an enormous number of fossils. And I think you all know the name of that very famous fossil hunting family, the Leakeys, and they worked in Olduvai Gorge, which is in the south of the East African area of fossil discoveries in northern Tanzania, but there are discoveries up and down the rift. We have a very excellent understanding of the geology of the rift, and indeed we have a very good understanding of the circumstances in which these ancient people died and became incorporated into fossils. But keep in mind that fossilization is an exceptionally rare and uncommon event. The vast bulk of animals, people, you name it, that lived in the past are now gone. Their beings have been dissolved and their constituent elements have returned to the soil to be created into new beings, new animals and new plants. So fossilization is an uncommon event, and when we find fossils, it's a very fortuitous circumstance. And here, the natural historian J. Maternus gives us an image of an early ancestor of ours dying near a waterhole. The creature is attacked after death by scavengers. The scavengers tear his body apart, as occurs all the time. And if you watch the Nature Channel, you see it all the time in their films. The pieces are buried at the bottom of the waterhole in the muck at the bottom of the water. And over time, more and more sediments cover over the skull. The skull, and perhaps other bones, is fossilized, that is, inorganic minerals like calcium carbonate filter through the bone, solidify it, and harden it. That's all a fossil is. A fossil is a preserved tissue. It can be a bone or a tooth, and it remains. And it would be, in fact, covered by successive sediments and lost to us forever, except in the Rift Valley. There has been enormous geological uplifting because of the Rift Valley. Many of you who have visited East Africa know that the Rift Valley in the east of Africa can be as high as a mile above sea level, like Nairobi or Johannesburg, and that uplifting allows these ancient sediments to be revealed to the light again. And you get erosion off these sediments, and eventually the skull erodes out to be observed by a paleontologist or an anthropologist walking deliberately to find these things. And if you look at this, this is the Awash River in north-central Ethiopia. This is a camp of a paleoanthropologist looking for bones. This back here are sediments. It looks like the Badlands of the Dakotas, and geologically it's very similar. And you see the sediments here of ancient lakes. And my colleagues and I have walked these sediments, and we look, and we look, and we look, and we look. And you've got to have fossil luck to find them. I've never had fossil luck. I get sick. The other people find fossils. But that's the way it goes. But people walking along these sediments looking down, find a fossil bone, a fossil tooth. Next one, please, Janet. Just like this. Next one, Janet. And this was a specimen found in northern Kenya. You can see the top of the skull, the huge brow ridges, a crest on top. You may say, ah, heck, that's merely a gorilla. But it isn't a gorilla. It's another beast. It's this. It's this individual, which is not a gorilla. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes why it's not only not a gorilla, it's not even related to gorillas. It's related to us. And it's an ancient, extinct creature. And we will see in a minute why we can look at these things in this way. Okay. The guys I'm going to talk about have an almost unpronounceable name. They're called Australopithecus. Why they're called that is beyond my comprehension, but Raymond Dart, a South African anatomist, in 1925 decided to call it that. And this was the fossil that he used to name it. And it's a fossil of a young child. And we're not quite sure of its exact age, because we're not quite sure how quickly or slowly it grew in relation to modern humans. We know that its first permanent molars erupted and or in the process of erupting, and we know in modern humans that can take place from 4.5 to 7, depending upon the population, its health status, and all other kinds of things. But what Dart saw, which was very interesting and really important, was the fact that even though this child still had its milk teeth in place, especially the eye teeth or the canines, they were small and non-projecting. Only humans among our close animal kin have small, non-projecting canines. Not canines that look like these tusk-like features. This is the skull of a chimpanzee. This is the skull of a gorilla. Not like these, but the small, non-projecting teeth that are typical of modern humans. And you all know that the only modern humans that have teeth like that come from Transylvania, and you don't see them during the day. You only see them at night or in the movies. So this was not part of our background. It's a part of the apes, and this child showed modern human-like traits. Now, if that were the only thing we had, then I would be here telling you, I don't know what's going on. Your guess is as good as mine. But that's not the only stuff we have. One of the things, in addition to our teeth and our big brains, our skills with language and tool making, one of the other things that is part of our unique ability is our ability to walk on two legs. We're bipeds. And that ability seems to have characterized much of our ancestral evolution. And one of the most extraordinary discoveries, Mary Leakey, in 1974, completely by accident, found a series of footprints in volcanic ashes in northern Tanzania. Now, these footprints were discovered by the merest chance. Because they were in volcanic ashes, we could subject them to a very, very accurate and very, very dependable radiometric dating process, and that dating process produced an age of 3.7 million years ago. What is extraordinary about these footprints, and you can see this footprint right here, is the fact that the footprint looks virtually like ours. Now, these guys weren't wearing shoes, so the toes are not all together as ours are because they're confined in shoes, but the anatomy is very clear. And when you look at a footprint here, and the footprint is this impression, these are little chisel marks that Mary Leakey and her colleagues had to use to get the hard material that impressed inside the footprint out. You can see that the big toe is the longest of the toes. You can see that the other toes fit against it. You can see the impression that all of you would make walking along the beach in the Jersey Shore during the summer and looking back and seeing your footprints. Now, how could this be so? Well, if I show you the foot of a gorilla and the foot of a human, you see something that you guys all stare at your feet at night, so you know that the big toe sits up against the other four toes. And we can see that here. Many of you will remember Dorothy Lamour. Many of you may not remember Bonzo on the other side, very famous co-star, as you recall. And you can see something that Bonzo has. Bonzo has an opposable big toe. Now, what does that look like? Well, so happens that I brought with me the cast of a gorilla foot. Now, this is a cast of an actual living gorilla. And you see that opposable big toe. This is not a hand. This is a foot. And it is a foot that, when it would walk, would leave a very distinctive footprint. Not the sort that you just saw from this site in Tanzania, but the footprint indicative of an ape. 3.7 million years ago, well documented, well defined in age, we have footprints documenting our kind of movement. No other close kin comes even remotely to be a biped or to leave a footprint like that. So, in fact, we have some extraordinary evidence. It's not bones, it's not teeth, it's the actual imprint of our ancestors that walked through this volcanic ash and then walked away. Now, J. Maternus gave us an impression of what these guys might look like, and they may have looked like this, but I can tell you right now, I have no idea what they look like. All we find are their bones and teeth. You can see all of the soft tissue reconstructions that you'd like. I have no idea whether they were furry or not. I have no idea what their skin color was. I have no idea what their eye color was. I don't even know if they smiled. All I can tell you is that we have their footprints impressed forever in this volcanic ash. Now, we have in addition other specimens. Many of you may have heard about the famous skeleton of Lucy. Lucy was a specimen that was found, again, in deposits that are well dated to greater than 3 million years old. And Lucy is one of the few specimens where we actually have much of the skeleton, a lower jaw, and some skull bones. It's not often that we find fossils this complete. Fossil discoveries, as I mentioned before, are very uncommon, and rarely do we find good materials. But what Lucy shows us, first of all, is a pelvis that is mostly like ours, that is like a modern bipedal human, not like an ape, but there are some differences. And in addition, there are differences in body size. Lucy was only 3.5 feet high, she only weighed 60 pounds. So in body size, she was like a chimp. But in the anatomy of her body, like the fact, like modern humans, we have our knees underneath our body weight so that we can support our body weight when we lift the leg off the ground when we're ordinarily walking. If we had knees like chimps that were on the side, when we took a step, we'd fall over. So we have a very specific orientation in the knee, but also in the pelvis. And Lucy possessed those. But Lucy had an odd proportion. She had much longer arms for her total body size. Even if you dressed her up, if you passed her in the street, you'd recognize her. You would certainly see her. So she was a biped, all right, but she differed from us in a number of ways. And when we look at Lucy's pelvis, what we simply did was take the original pelvic bone, which we found. This is the sacrum, or the last bone of the vertebral column, and we simply make a mirror image and make the other bone here to make a complete pelvis. Now, when we compare this to a modern human is up here, and this is typical of modern humans. Lucy, you see, is a little flatter, but she has the same general anatomy that we have that permits bipedality. She's not us. She doesn't have the specific features that we have, but she has sufficient of them to be a biped. Now, if we take the Lucy pelvis and put a skull on top of it, now we see something really extraordinary. Because when we compare Lucy's species, an Australopithecus, with a living chimp, you see immediately that there's a lot of difference. We can see a bipedal-like pelvis, like ours. Not exactly, but very, very similar. Very different from the pelvis of an ape, which is very long and very narrow, and is typical of other living mammals. So when you compare them, you see this guy is really human-like in its locomotor ability, in its bipedality. It's like us. It's not ape-like. But when you look at the skull, you see an ape-sized brain, because the brain size is typical of a chimpanzee. It has a really heavy-duty projecting face, like a chimp, but it doesn't have, as I pointed out to you before, the very large tusk-like canines. No animals in our background, none of our ancestors have those tusk-like canines. What they have are relatively flat, non-projecting canines like we do. So what you see here is a really curious mix. Human-like traits, ape-like traits, and next one, please, John. When we look at the jaws, and I'm just going to get a little complex here and a little detailed. On the left is the upper jaw, the maxillary jaw of a chimp. On the right is the maxillary jaw of a modern human. This modern human only has 2 molars. The wisdom teeth are not present here. Many of you may not have wisdom teeth like this individual, but it has 2 molars. What I want to show you in particular is the nature of this on a jaw that comes from the Lucy deposits. And you can see, first of all, that the jaw is very long in keeping with its projecting face, and that when you look at the back teeth, they are absolutely massive. They are, you compare this second molar, the 12-year molars, with a human 12-year molar, or with a chimpanzee 12-year molar, there's no comparison. These guys have really, really big back teeth. Remember, these are small-bodied guys with ape-sized brains, but with a human locomotor system. They walk like us. And yet, they have a perfectly special back dentition. If you ask me, what were they doing with those huge teeth? And keep in mind that these guys had heavy wear on their teeth. They were wearing them down really strongly, and they had really thick layers of enamel. And yet, they had these big teeth. They must have been doing something in the way of very hard chewing and grinding, but I don't know. No one knows for the moment. Not that it is unknowable. It's just that we haven't yet figured out what their diet might have been. But it must have been a very special one. And so what you're seeing here is a unique species. Brain, ape-like, projecting face, ape-like, body like a human in its locomotion, and its dentition unique. This is an extinct animal. It's no longer on the planet. Whatever it's doing, whatever it was doing, is gone. It is extinct, and so it's its behavior. And so when we look at those guys, and we can look at the same thing from the side, you see the really big back teeth, the non-projecting canines. And from the front, you see the same thing, the non-projecting canines, but the very, very large projecting face. So when we look at that, we can understand why we can see these guys within the context of human evolution and try to understand what they mean. Now, I'm showing you here, and I apologize for the quality of this picture. The original print got sort of messed up. On the left is the jaw, what's left of it, this is all we have, of the fossil skeleton we call Lucy. And on the right is a perfectly ordinary modern human adult. Unfortunately, its wisdom tooth fell out after the individual died, but it has a relatively complete dentition. It's a reasonably mature individual with wear on most of the teeth. What I want to point out to you is, for Lucy, we know Lucy's body size because we have her skeleton. And using standard forensic measures that we use all the time, we can say Lucy's about 3.5 feet high and about 60 pounds. Now, that's interesting because this adult modern human is probably at least twice that, maybe 2.5 times that body size. May I point out to you the size of Lucy's third molar? Compare that to this modern human third molar. How about the second molar? How about the first molar? What I'm showing you is a creature that has this absolutely massive set of back teeth. And we know how big she was. She was a little person with a massive dentition. What was she doing with it? Again, I can't tell you that. I just don't know why she had that dentition, but indeed she did. When you look at the front, you can see that the teeth are cracked and broken and lost, but in other specimens that were found in this deposit, we know that the canines were not large and projecting. So it wasn't an ape. But you already know that because I just showed you one of her friends. And that animal also had the big back teeth and all of the other features that were not ape-like in the dentition. So what you're seeing is a combination of features that's no longer with us. I can't explain it to you. I don't understand it. What I am involved with is looking at these things. When I started my examination of the fossils 35 years ago, I suspect I had the same sorts of doubts that all of you did about exactly what was going on. Where did we come from? How can we understand it? Ideas and questions that we always have. And we are on the planet and we're unable to stop thinking that way. And we are like that. And for me, what that really means is that these creatures whom I have handled, whom I have helped excavate, whom I know from intimate connections over many years, these are our ancestors. I am not here to tell you that I know why we evolved from these creatures. I can tell you that I have my own private ideas about them, and they probably do not differ very much from yours. But I have handled these, and I know that they represent creatures that are no longer alive on the planet. I know they are not apes. They are so similar to us that they are part and parcel of our biology, but not quite. Some of these guys have such enormous faces and muscles that they are truly unusual. And this is another kind of Australopithecus, and this particular one has an enormous face, a huge crest on the top, and in fact, this particular creature I have with me right here, again, you might say, well, it's a gorilla, but it really isn't, because this is a creature that doesn't have a lot of the specific anatomies of a gorilla, nor does it have the huge projecting canine teeth. Next one, please, John. And you can see from the side the development of that crest, please. And when you look at a lower jaw from one of these creatures, you can find that the lower jaw is huge and massive. Let me point out a couple of things. This is a jaw that comes from East Africa. It's dated at 2 million years ago. It's compared to that modern human I showed you before with the Lucy jaw. First of all, look at the size of the third molar, the wisdom tooth, the tooth that comes in around 17 to 21 in modern humans. Compare it to the size of a living human. How about that second molar? There's simply nothing like that. There are no people that even remotely have teeth the size of this or the size of Lucy. But let me point out the front. You have the premolars, and then you have the canine. And the canines are really small. The incisors are really small. That's not the way a jaw of an ape looks like. A jaw of an ape has these huge canines. There isn't anything like that here. This is not an ape. This is part of our ancestry. And there is no way that we can look at it except in that fashion. Now, the process of fossil discovery is an ongoing one. And each time that there are discoveries, and you may have noticed that the Leakey family announced the discovery in East Africa some weeks ago. There was a French team in Kenya who also found some materials just before that. This is the skull of one of these early ancestors of ours. It's still encased in rock. They're still working it out. I had the opportunity of looking at this in 1998, and it's going to take years to get it out. But what's exciting about this is that for the first time, we have a jaw, the skull, and the whole skeleton of a single individual. And this will be able to tell us a great deal. So what I'm saying to you is that in the 35 years that I have studied our ancestors, we have found hundreds and thousands of these specimens. And each time we find something, we learn a little bit more. This is a process of discovery, of uncovering. I must tell you, it is extraordinarily exciting. It is so wonderful to deal with the way by which our ancestors have developed and understand their relationship to us. Finally, I wanted to show you this skeleton. This is a skeleton that's not as old as the guys I was just looking at you. I was just showing you. I was just looking at the time, which time is up. And I think I'll say this. So let me end right here. I didn't want to show you this anyway until later. I'm going to save it. Sort of a jack in the box. So thank you for your patience, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mann. Dr. Jack Cuozzo.
Yes.
Well, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Mann, for that presentation. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Mr. Humber, for inviting me. I'm going to hit this subject right head on because I've also handled fossils for 20 years, and this is what I've found. I found human evolution is the wrong scientific model to explain the data. And the reason that is because sometimes it adjusts the data, sometimes it dismisses the data, and sometimes it misses the data entirely because of preconceptions and assumptions. And in the process, it has destroyed the faith of our youth, associating them with animals, and now we have the most uninhibited youth that we have ever had in this country, and also marriage, because no longer Adam and Eve exist literally, but they are now, since the fish, there have been male and female, and of course the family because of that also. Proverbs 23:7 says, "As a man thinks, so is he." Roger Lewin in Bones of Contention writes, "It is a fact, a common fantasy promulgated mostly by the scientific profession itself, that in the search for objective truth, data dictate conclusions. If this were the case, then each scientist faced with the same data would necessarily reach the same conclusion. But as we've seen again and again, frequently this does not happen. Data are just as often molded to fit preferred conclusions. And the interesting question becomes, what shapes the preference of an individual or a group of researchers, not what is truth?" So we have to look at these questions now and see what is truth. First thing I ran into in my studies in France was a statement by the French founder of French anthropology. "As for me, I would much rather be a perfected ape than a degraded atom." Now, one of the things you run into as you go into the subject of evolution and creation is that there is a distinction between perfected apes and degraded atoms. Perfected apes don't need Christ. Degraded atoms do. I ran into this in the first museum in France. Chapelle-aux-Saints, a little Neanderthal child whose face was created, however, the jaw was put out of position. And a fourth-year dental student could have put it back in, and I put the teeth into occlusion, and there you are with a normal occlusion. But what did that show? Something, I think, that was not supposed to come out, and that was orthodontically, and we do this every day, at least I did for over 30 years, we measure children's skulls, my living depended upon it, and we found that the little Chapelle-aux-Saints child was retruded. He had a small face in relation to the modern one-year-old, and he was supposed to be 2.5. Now, he had a face that was so small that you could tuck it in to a face of a one-year-old. And then we found something else that the anthropologists never look for, because, of course, they don't take cephalometric x-rays, and the first time anyone ever went into a museum was in 1979 with the cephalometric x-ray. Cephalometrics was used by Dr. Krogman on Indians and on people from Iran, but never amongst the real fossil record that we're talking about, Dr. Mann is talking about. It has never been subjected to that until 1979. And Richard Leakey to this day will not let me look at that skulls that Dr. Mann has shown on this screen tonight. Here we have minus 14 degrees. Now, what does that mean? That means the palate of this little child was 14 degrees less. I mean, he was way up and tipped way up in the air. Nobody would have ever known that unless they took an x-ray. It's about the level of a human embryo at minus 20. A little human embryo, a Neanderthal child of 2.5, having the palatal level, the level of development of the upper jaw of a human embryo. Our children are born with level palates. Now, what else did I find? Well, really interesting. I found immature characters. Nobody talked about these. They think, well, what about immature characters? Chapelle-aux-Saints had a little piece of fiber cartilage and connective tissue still between his lower, two halves of the lower jaw here at 2.5 years of age. According to the modern experts, that's supposed to disappear at between 4 months and 1 year of age. Gibraltar child, another Neanderthal, had bone apposition, bone building up where our children today have bone being lost. We have orthognathic faces. That's where we get our name from, orthodontist, because this face is building bone when it's supposed to be losing bone. And also the youngest child, about 4.5 years of age, with what we call a fissure, the tympanomastoid fissure. It's open compared to the modern child, which is not open. It's very closed up here. It looks almost like the newborn infant. For those of you who can't see that, I'll push it up. Looks like the newborn infant, the youngest child. Very much like the newborn infant. And guess what? In Moustier, I found it plugged up. They put a wedge in it so you couldn't see it. That's an interesting trick. Now, I saw Le Moustier. I was the first one, I think I'm the first one, to see Moustier since it came out of the Soviet Union in 1989. The walls fell in Berlin, and I got there to Germany, and Moustier's jaw, the lower jaw, was placed 30 millimeters forward to make it look ape-like. The upper jaw, 30 millimeters forward. This is ridiculous. You call this science? I don't know what you call this. I looked at this thing and I couldn't believe it. And this is the way to slide. This is what you buy. Well, the Germans are now straightening this out because I brought it to their attention. In any orthodontic or oral surgeon's office, that'd be a dislocated jaw. Here now. You take this little Neanderthal child. Very complicated. I'm going to make it simple for you. This little Neanderthal child grows up. He grows up either into Le Moustier or he grows up into a Gibraltar. But let's suppose he grows up into Le Moustier. Now, cephalometric X-ray reveals that if he grows up into a Gibraltar, the back of his lower jaw has got to grow really fast. Really fast. It's got to grow sometimes 4 or 5 times the rate of modern humans. If it grows up into a Moustier here, and I've made it 18 instead of 16 because it really is about 16 years of age, but I did it so I wouldn't inflate the Neanderthal age, it has to grow fast too. Are these rates acceptable? Who knows? These are fast rates. Are they ape-like? Well, no, not quite. Apes are about twice as fast as us, but these rates are approaching them. Now, here comes an interesting one. I measured the youngest child's skull. The youngest child's skull was measured by, it was in Charles Lyell's book, wasn't measured by him, but he had it at 195.58. That's front to back measurement. Frapont in 1936 had 188 back to front. Tillier had 176 back to front. Nancy Migne-Purvis had 176 back to front. I did it in 83 or 82 rather, and I got 164. And here's 176 out here. Now, why in the world would you inflate a skull? What's the point? I mean, really, a 176 to make it from 164? Well, here's the point. It's really simple. This was a slow-growing kid. And this kid, relating Angus to the SPE 1 and 2, which are the closest Neanderthal adults in Belgium. Here's a measurement for SPE 200. Frapont got that, and Wolkoff got 216. I think that's a little bit big. But 164 is only 82% of 200. It's 164 is 75% of 216. Now, humans are supposed to be 89% by the time they're 3 years old. This guy is slow. He's only 82. He's supposed to be 89. By the time he's 5, he's supposed to be, if you're human, you're supposed to be 91% of your skull, front to back, completely done by the time you're 5. 91%. How's he going to get to be that? Well, I'll tell you how he's going to get to be that. You can guess. They inflated the skull. Tillier and Migne-Purvis made it 176. So now, guess what? It's 88. 88%. You need 88, man? You get 88. All right. What happened now when Moriel and Barr did something? They looked at two Neanderthal children. They looked at Angus and looked at Roch de Marcel. And they said synostosis, which means closure of the premaxillary suture, was found to occur later in Neanderthal children than in modern ones. Wow. Later, huh? Persistence of an open premaxillary suture represents potential for extended period of growth in the Neanderthal mid-face. Extended period of growth. That is not ape-like. That is biblical. Extended period growth is what the Bible talks about. People grow. It implies people, well, it doesn't imply, it says they live longer, but most likely when you live longer, you have a later developmental period and your puberty arrives late. Well, that's not what's happening today, as Time magazine said. The 1997 research project just came out in Time, October 2000. It said 225 pediatric researchers studying 17,000 girls at age 8. Almost 50% of African-American girls are going through pubertal changes. If that doesn't scare us, I don't know what does. And you know why nobody cares about this? Because the only way you can understand this is from a creation and degeneration point of view. We are devolving. We are not evolving, as Dr. Mann said. We are devolving, and it's time we started to recognize that. We're killing our kids. because we keep telling them they're evolving and they're not. The increased frequency, Italian group, Sisterino, 15 pediatric researchers, the increased frequency of idiopathic CPP in girls aged 7 to 9, 7.9 may suggest an early but otherwise normal onset of puberty in many of these girls as a consequence of a trend towards earlier maturation. Our kids are maturing early. You have to tell an orthodontist that? No. Orthodontists see it all the time. We see kids getting older and older all the time, quicker and quicker. I got a nice letter from Eric Dillinger, in orthodontist, American-born orthodontist in Indiana. He said, clinically, do you see more early eruptions around age 10 for full permanent dentition? This appears to be more common in the last 10 years. Well, it is more common in the last 10 years. And we have seen it, and I've seen it in my office. I had many girls going through their first menstrual period at 10, many more than I had 30 years ago. Here, George Nadler says in the orthodontic or angled orthodontist, using a tooth, the canine tooth that Dr. Mann was talking about, in human canine tooth, erupting earlier and earlier between the 1990s and the 1970s, a period of 20 years when diet hadn't changed all that much. 1.21 years faster in females and 1.52 in females and 1.12 in males. So the 1970s and the 1990s show a change of developmental rates. I received this letter from the chairman of a department of a major university, of Earth Sciences department, and he said, I enjoyed your book because it is honest and it covers new ground. You also made interesting discoveries, including evidence that scientists have been misled by their biases. After working with Steve Gould, I'm inclined to believe that what you found is largely true. Now, let's look at adult growth. What happens to our heads when we get older? What happens to our heads when we get older? Every one of us, if you're over 50, you have a hat that fit you when you were 20, it doesn't fit anymore. And that's because our head gets larger. And some very specific things happen. And this is a longitudinal study of humans in the University of Michigan. And it took people and it tracked their growth. And when they grew, as they get older, we don't realize it, but our faces change. Take a picture of your grandmother when she was, say, 20, and look at when she's 70, and you'll see great changes in the face. And this is what happens. And the jaw moves forward, and the teeth move forward. Orthodontists don't like that part. And the brow ridge comes forward. Brow ridge comes forward. Take a look at that. And the nose drops down. That's bad news. And we see the ear going up, and we see a point coming out in the back of the head here. And you know what? If we lived to the age that the Bible people lived to, we would look very much like a Neanderthal. Here is a study that my son-in-law did, a computer expert at the University of Texas, PhD, and he took this and he said, what would happen if we lived to 500? And he said, here's what would happen. That the brow ridge would move that far forward, that we don't have a good measurement for the sinus up here. The eyeball would get, the orbit would get larger. The upper jaw would come down. The chin would flatten out. Flatten out. If you saw my book, you saw somebody chop a chin off. I was there the day they did that in France. They wouldn't have had to do that. You just wait a little while. What happens is, as we go on. Now here's this back of this jaw, and it's coming down. So this is what I would term a Neanderthalization. Now Neanderthals had different genes than us, and we're not the same. And people have devolved, and apes have devolved, and we've seen a lot of Dr. Mann's complex apes that he's talking about. And there's no question in my mind that there were complex apes. Some of them were bipedal, some of them weren't. But here we have Lemoustier. Now, Lemoustier grew into La Chapelle. Let's just say he grew into La Chapelle. And this I presented at the International Conference of Creationism in 1998. And if he grew into La Chapelle, and this lower, what we call lower facial height, I'm giving him 5 more years to get to be 21. He grows 15 millimeters, go from here to here. And if that's what this youngster goes into this older person who's supposed to be around 40, 35 or 40, and you can't read this, but let me just tell you that the rates of development would be 12.8 to 10 times that of modern human. Ready to accept that? Ready to say that these people, these Neanderthal people, developed very, very quickly? Here's how they document that. In 1987, American Journal of Physical Anthropology, we see an article on La Chapelle-aux-Saints, famous Neanderthal, and you're looking at a modern human premolar right there, and what you're looking at is La Chapelle's upper left second premolar. That's a second premolar there too. I'm sorry, second premolar, second premolar. And you're looking at a side view, that's the occlusal view, that's side view again. You're looking at the mesial of that tooth. And Eric Trinkhaus said, talking about this guy, Eric Trinkhaus said, however, Valois, French anthropologist, correctly noted that the cranial sutures are incompletely fused and suggested an age probably less than 40. Such a lower estimate would correspond with the rather modest wear. Catch this. modest wear on the surviving premolars. Stage 2 of Molnar is sequenced for P4. Complicated? No, it's not complicated. You're looking at root. There's no crown there. There's no crown at all. That's root. There is absolutely no crown, and Molnar over here, 2, is only wear facets, no observable dentine. How do you make a Neanderthal 40? Simple. You just adjust a little bit, and you say you call that stage 2, and it's no crown at all. Now, what about time problems? I mean, Dr. Mann has got a plausible sequence of human-like apes going along on a time sequence. And it seems logical that as you have the encephalization or encephalization of the head gets bigger, and the body gets, the bipedalism comes first, and so forth. But is it true? Is this time frame that we're working with true? Is there anybody that doubts it? Well, in 1982, we visited a cave called Neanderthal Cave, and the door was split open, and on the wall was by the way, this cave was closed to the public, and guess why? There was a carving of a dinosaur and a mammoth head-to-head combat. Many of you have seen this on the internet, and you can see it if you just tap into this and to put my name or put the book Buried Alive, and you'll see this dinosaur and mammoth. Now, these two have never supposed to have existed together. 65 million years ago was the dinosaur. Mammoth is around 20. Now, who saw this? Who saw this? And look at the red mammoth that has been written about in Anne Sifking's book. And she said Neanderthal is a cave of major importance. So we have a legitimate cave closed to the public. Something wasn't right there. Something was not right. Now we go to Swanscombe. Swanscombe, England. United Kingdom, September 25th, 2000. My wife and I, they're having a picnic. And there's my wife, Diane. There's the picnic table. There's the Swanscombe Monument. We're picking up stones. We're picking up little rocks, and we're looking at things. And we made a discovery. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time ever seen by any audience in the world, this is the fourth piece of the Swanscombe skull. We discovered this mastoid process. This is a cast purchased from Dr. Mann's laboratory by Dr. Austin Robbins and myself. And we've been working on this for weeks. This is not the actual fossil. The actual fossil is now in the hands of the British. Returned to the British Embassy. Here is the piece that fits in like a puzzle piece into the side of the Swanscombe skull. And the British should be happy about this, because now they have a clue that there's more stuff there, more fossils in this area, more pieces of this Swanscombe. Swanscombe has been attributed, the Swanscombe skull, to a woman's skull. Wolpoff and Day called a woman's skull. Here it is now in the posterior view, and you can see the Cro-Magnon and the Swanscombe, very similar angulation of the mastoid. That's the new addition right there, the mastoid process, a fragment rather of the mastoid. Here's Le Moustier from behind, La Ferracie from behind. It has been said that Moustier has a characteristic of Neanderthal. His head looks very much unlike a Neanderthal when he's young, but when he gets older, this is how he looks. And I can make sure, I'm going to get this point really clear tonight, that this Moustier lived quite a long time, much longer than anybody ever thought, or if he had lived, rather. Ferracie lived a much longer time than anybody had ever thought. Moustier died at 16, well, I think he's older than 16, but this is the way the head is shaped, not like this as he gets older. Cro-Magnon, Swanscombe, very similar. Now, what about the Swanscombe skull? What does it show? It shows something very unusual, fragment of the mastoid portion of temporal bone, and you can see air cells. I wish you could see these in the actual x-ray, but those are air cells. Here is the lateral view of the mastoid. Here's the inner view, the sigmoid sulcus. This is the place where the brain drains, the venous drainage of the brain. Here is the posterior view with the occipital, the juxtamastoid process. There's the mastoid process there. Here is a modern human, and look how bulky it is compared to the modern human, and look how thin this is. The digastric notch is right there where a muscle attaches the digastric muscle, the posterior belly of it. And here is a hole which we are calling a trephining hole. And this skull is supposed to be 250,000 years of age. And why are we calling it a trephining hole? Because there are signs of actual instrumentation. There's also bone healing going on around this hole, actual ripples of bone. But I want to point something else out to you before I take this off. Around this part of the mastoid process is the tympanomastoid fissure. And if you can see this up close, this is a red line, and it looks very much like that red ochre mammoth that we just saw in the cave. And I have documented red ochre on Peshta-Azeh, which is about 50,000 years. I have documented it on, now we have a skull, it's 250,000 years. We know red ochre was used at 2,000 to 3,000 years ago in the Middle East. Now you tell me, or somebody tell me, how in the world red ochre burial powder can last 300,000 years as a custom. It doesn't happen. Maybe there isn't 300,000 years that we're talking about. Maybe the 300,000 years have been something somebody's mind made up. Look at this. Dr. Brothwell said, look for scratches. My professor, Dr. Krogman, said the same thing. Look for scratches. Microscopically, around this trephination hole, you see scratches. Now, that's an orthodontic wire, 0.406 millimeters. Those are scratches around this hole. What, could that hole be a wormhole? Sure, it could be a wormhole. However, we see crystallized pus. Look at this. This is crystallized, purulent discharge coming out of the posterior surface of this. So this Swanscombe woman died most likely of mastoiditis, that disease you get from in the mastoid process. Here again is an example of the bone healing going on around the surface of this hole. A differential diagnosis would have to include something like perforation from mastoiditis, but then you'd say to yourself, well, would you see this beautiful cut here? And would you see the scratches that I just showed you? It seems to me that these scratches portray human activity. Now something that's going to rock the place, because no one's ever seen this before, but in 250,000 years ago, here is a mammal-like reptile carving that's similar to the dinosaur carving, first time seen by any audience in the world. Right there. There's my orthodontic wire. There's Synagnathus from the Triassic period, between 248 and 213 million years before the present. Here is the carving of Synagnathus. Look at the canine tooth. Look at this canine tooth. Look at the diastema. Look at the diastema. Look at the molars. Look at the molars. Look at the otic opening back here. Look at what we call the zygoma up here. And look at the masseter, the big massive jaw back there. And that's a carved out eye. Dr. Robbins is an expert he went to professor at 3 dental schools and knows carving, teeth carving, because of his experience with microscopic studies in a tooth. This is a carving of an ancient creature 248 to 213 million years ago. At 250,000 years ago, the time scale is Kerplui. There's good evidence to say potassium argon isn't even correct, because as we'll get into a little bit, argon comes out with the potassium. We'll talk about that in a minute, though. What about another carving from Swanscombe? Here are 2 horse heads and a fish on top, done at supposedly 250,000 years ago. That's an orthodontic wire right there. This carving would fit under an orthodontic wire. Does that say something about people who had better eyesight? Does that say something about people who came from apes? No. It talks about people who had a superior genome, who were a little better than we were, who could see better, who could carve, and who had some technology. And guess what? 26,000 years their date, you find almost identical cave painting on the wall in France with a fish on top of it, 2 horse heads and a fish. And look what we got here in miniature in Swanscombe at 300,000 or 250,000. 2 horse heads and a fish. Now, what does that say about time? It tells you that these guys have missed stuff. The preconceptions, the assumptions, they won't even look for it. Because man came from what he said they came from. Those creatures. They're not complex apes that God made along with us. No. They are our relatives. Oh, sure. Sure they're our relatives. You know what they are? They're an ape that had human features that God created, and now that Meave Leakey found another one, the whole thing looks like one created bunch. Now, if you have created apes running around in Africa, you're going to find more. What about 3 or 4 or 5? By the way, WT 40,000 is pushing Lucy right off the stage. Finally, a little bird talks to you from Swanscombe. A little bird in the Barnfield pit of Swanscombe. They had the courtesy, they had the ability and the reasoning to mark the hole with some black manganese with this little bird here. Look at the pupil on his eye. Look at his bifid tail. The bifid tail. Look at the pupil in the eye up close. 250,000 years ago, your relatives and my relatives were human beings who could do things like this. Ape-like creatures. Archaic Homo sapiens was never given credit for anything like this. As a matter of fact, art didn't even come into the fossil record or into the archaeological record at all until the Upper Paleolithic. Have we not missed something? My point here tonight is we have missed something severely because evidence like this is ignored, is not allowed into the record, and taken just completely for granted. These people can't do this. It's impossible. So don't even look for it. Well, I've got news. It's probably all over the place. And probably those big instruments that they've used over the years, with cutting tools for food and meat and things like that, because I found them too. I found the various old Dolan things. I found, Acheulean. I found the Mousterians tools, various crude tools. But I don't think they used them. Maybe the kids used them. I don't know. But what are we doing with these things? Why don't we look for these now? Well, guess what? They're going to start after this tonight. People are going to start looking for these. And you have to look at them. Look how small that orthodontic wire is there. And I'm going to close on that because this is testimony that man has always been man, and we came from human relatives, and our kids are not apes. And they're not related to apes at all. Last thing, Alexander Marshak said, under the microscope, the gray bird bone became a library, which I sat reading and pondering for many days. He wrote a book called The Roots of Civilization, and he talks about microcarvings. He saw it first, I believe, but now I've seen it, and I think there's no question about it is a reality. Thank you very much.
Between now and the end of the rebuttals, if you want to write a question, 5 cards, and perhaps a little later we'll have someone collecting those cards. Are any of those cards ready yet? You know, if someone, perhaps after section F, we'll collect those cards, but we'll just pass them to the center, to the 2 aisles, and we'll collect them, and then they'll be brought to the person who's going to sort them through. We now want to have a 5-minute rebuttal for the affirmative on the part of Dr. Mann.